Hey guys. Okay, so long story short, I'm a dash under the weather, but I'm gonna try my best to fight my way through this video and pretty much get you guys all the good information. And obviously, this whole video is going to be talking about first services and the motorcycle's break-in period and what all happens at that point when you bring it into the dealership for your break-in service, whether it's 500, 600 miles, whatever your brand might be. And I'm just going to give you a walkthrough of all the stuff they do and how they go about it, just to kind of give you a good idea of what to expect, or if you're on the debate on whether or not it is or isn't worth it, or should you do it or shouldn't you do it. And I just want to go over, talk about some information related to that. And that way you guys can make up your own decisions on how you want to go about it, how you want to do it, and pretty much start off from the base. So I'm going to pause real quick. I have a lot of my paperwork that I want to go through with you guys, and pretty much I'm going to show you going dot by dot through the checklist on my bike as it is officially at the break-in interval, and then help you guys out better understand it, see it, and maybe replicate it for yourselves if need be. So I will be right back. Also, if you guys notice that this video isn't super shaky, it's because my girlfriend lent me a tripod that she had to help make these videos a little bit better, a little less shaky, because she mentioned that like it's pretty much like could give you motion sickness with the amount of jostling around that I was doing while trying my best to hold the camera still. And apparently after going back and even watching my two recent videos, it is like, yeah, it's pretty bad. I got a little motion sick myself at one point, and I am sorry about that. But let's begin at the start. You buy a motorcycle, and one of the first things they start talking to you about is your break-in period. Now, there's a lot of debate between how to break in your motorcycle. Now, this is going to be Kawasaki's version, but it's pretty similar just about anywhere you go. Each one will have their different minimums, maximums, yada yada. But for Kawasaki, for the first 250 miles, you're not supposed to go over 4,000 RPM. From 250 to 400, don't go over 6. And then 400 to 600, ride moderately, whatever they mean by that. Some people say you got to follow this to a T, because when you take it to the dealership and they plug it into the computer, the bike will tell on you. And that actually is true. Working at a dealership and seeing how Triumph, Aprilia, Moto Guzzi, and a handful of other brands track the way you use your motorcycle, that is true. If somebody really cared enough, when they plug it into the computer, they can see what you've done and whether or not you did or didn't follow those specs. Now, by all means, if you didn't, it's not like, boom, that's it, warranty gone, sir. But it definitely would, if you were to have a warranty-related claim and you didn't follow this, and whatever the brand is requested a copy of the riding record or whatever that brand wants to call it, they would have grounds to try to deny the claim. So some people love to just buy the bike, ride it like you stole it, or ride it the way you want, and just don't even pretend like it exists. But at the 600 mile marker, or whatever the mile marker is for you, get the oil changed. Now, there's some truth to that as well. As of this point, there's only ever been one study truly conducted where somebody purchased two exact copies of a brand new motorcycle and absolutely dogged on one of them from day one, mile one, and then babied the other from mile 1 to break-in period. And then they broke the entire engine down and compared them with the finest measurements of tools that they had available, and there was no difference of any kind, no measurable difference. So who knows? I wish I could sit here and reference that information enough to tell you the exact type of bike they did that with, but who knows? You know, I'm sure it wasn't like an R6, ZX6R Super Sport Inline 4, yada, yada, yada. So realistically, you can do what you want, but I personally did not take the chance. I followed it to a T, did what I had to do, and took good care of the bike. So let's move into the next part. So your first service. The biggest part about it is that you get the old oil out and put the new oil in, which is very true. That is a big component. That break-in oil that they put in there is very specifically designed and mentored to collect any and all little shavings, particles, little pieces of metal that might get sheared off as everything mates and bleeds and comes together, which is phenomenal. That's the heat cycles, the miles put on, the variation of the RPMs, all of that helps seat every single seal and bit and piece of your bike. And that's why those first 100 to 250 miles is so super critical over the remainder of it. But the first 600 miles, if a problem is going to occur, it's going to be relevant within that period of time. So once you hit that point, is it really just a glorified oil change? I can't really say. You're going to have to be the judge as I walk through it, and then you can decide for yourself. Some people state very proudly and very clearly, and I've heard it many times before from many different riders. I'll see if I can do it my best. Oh, I'm going to take care of everything myself after this first service, because this first service is the one you guys report to insert manufacturer here to make sure that my warranty is good. Well, that actually is not true. I'm sure for certain brands it might be. However, Kawasaki very specifically on their warranty under frequently asked questions, it says in big bold claim, they will not void or tear up your warranty as long as you keep receipts and record of everything being done as it should have been. And so for Kawasaki specifically, they will not get you in trouble for that. So you can feel free to do whatever you want to do. You can do your first service. You can do all your services yourself. You just have to have record and proof that they were done and done correctly. Don't get me wrong. There's certain things in here that I would definitely not trust myself to do. But a first service, let's go through it and let's deep dive into it and see exactly what's in it. So before we actually physically do them, I'm going to go through and read what is a part of the first service on Kawasaki. And this is specifically for the H2, but all you got to do is open your own maintenance manual, your owner's manual, to whatever page it is that gives you your service intervals and follow along with the appropriate category that applies to you. So first and foremost, it tells me to check for error codes and perform a dynamic inspection using Kawasaki's diagnostic tool. Wow, that's a mouthful. What exactly is a dynamic inspection? So pretty much what they're going to do is they're going to see if there's any check engine lights problems, error codes, ABS, service wrenches, blah, blah, blah. And if none of that is going on, they're still going to plug the bike in, They're going to make sure they reset all your service reminders and other things. And then on top of that, they're going to pull up all the stats and datas that show you every minute little detail about your bike, how it's running, when spark occurs, yada, 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 yada. And they're just going to look at those and make sure that nothing is technically out of spec. Because if something is out of spec in this aspect, it could ultimately lead to a problem. It could ultimately be an issue down the road that they might be able to correct now. But for the overwhelming majority, as long as you're buying a motorcycle that has a decent reputation for reliability, I wouldn't be able to say 9 out of 10 times or 1 out of 100, but it's extremely rare that it would reveal any sort of issue. And this is also the moment in the where they're on the computer and it tells on you about how you've been riding and if you broke it incorrectly, yada yada. So next, idle speed. Well, this is a very easy one. They're just going to start your bike and see where it idles. They're going to make sure that if you brought it in cold, that the cold idle speed is where it's supposed to be. And if it's running, if your idle speed is sitting where it's supposed to be. Now, on bikes like this or some of these super sports, there's actually an adjustment nozzle that you can change that yourself, and you can change it pretty much to whatever you need it to for whatever you want it to, if you're going to be stunting and yada yada yada. However, the idle speed, which is inside of your owner's manual, they're just going to make sure that the number in the owner's manual and the number on the bike's RPM at no throttle is the same. And for this, it is. So we're done with that. Throttle control system is your next step. This is going to be looking at the play, how smooth it returns, no drag, and I'm going to get up and actually physically show you this one so that way you can see it. All right, so essentially what they're going to do is they're going to come over here and they're going to just make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do, that it's flicking back and forth. There's no drag, there's no hard, it's not like stuttering forwards or backwards. And as you can see, this is butter smooth, and that would mean it's cleared and ready to move on to the next step. Alrighty, the fuel system. Alright, so this is where they're going to check everything out. They're going to make sure if you have a very easily visible fuel filter, that there's no weird particles in there, that like, it's extremely rare, but sometimes in some situations in the manufacturer's plant, they make the gas tanks and then they'll just sit around somewhere. And then eventually they get used for a bike. And at any point in time within this process, who knows what kind of junk, gunk, yada yada falls inside of that tank, or possibly even improper welds or problems like that, things that might get accidentally kicked in there, whether it be flakes of dirt, yada yada, doesn't matter. And eventually that'll work itself down over the 600 miles, get caught in your fuel filter, and that's a big portion of what they're checking. They're going to make sure that everything is working correctly. And they'll check, obviously, like the fuel breather, make sure that that's going good, and that your pressure relief is going good, because you'll notice that if on a hot day, you'll hear the bike's gas cap doing like a small and then if you open the gas cap, it's like, it's stuff like that, making sure all that's operational. And then that's it for the rest of this page. So let's move on to the next one. The cooling system. Okay, so this one I tested off camera, but you really don't need to see this in order to understand it. Pretty much your bike, if it has a cooling system like a radiator and cooling fans and all that good stuff, pretty much what they're going to do is, since they already started it, they're checking over all the other stuff. They're just going to let it keep getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter until it's like 200 some degrees or whatever the trip point is on that particular bike. And you visibly, or not visibly, like you can actually hear the fans kick on and all the cooling kick in, and that the bike actually attempts to self-regulate its heat appropriately. Next, clutch operation. Now, this one's easy enough. I don't mind showing this one on camera as well. So for this part, what they're looking for is clutch play. They're looking for clutch engagement when your friction zone starts occurring, things like that. And they're going to be looking for disengagement where it actually turns off, where you're not even on it at all. And they're just going to make sure it's in a healthy zone to make sure that your clutch isn't accidentally constantly riding as you're riding. They want to make sure that whenever it's out, your gear is fully engaged and the clutch is not burning. And same difference, that you can pull this all the way in and the bike still isn't trying to pull you forward. It is completely disengaged. Completely engaged. And they're going to just make sure that that's all functional and working as intended. And the next one, I don't mind showing you either. It is bike specific, but for this one, it is relevant. It is the clutch fluid, hoses, and pipe. Pretty much what they're going to do is they're going to completely look over and really inspect your clutch fluid reservoir and make sure that it's not bleeding at the seals, that the pressure isn't like bursting out of any sort of seam or hose clamp. They're going to make sure that there's no splits, pinches, etc. within any of the hoses. And they're just going to pretty much do their best to follow your clutch system from top to bottom to then ensure that it is fully operational and not leaking. Now, I'll show you best I can, but I've already looked over mine top to bottom, left to right, and I am in the clear again. I am not having any sort of clutch fluid loss, hoses, pipes problems, pinches, clamps, nothing. I'm having no issues of any kind, and none of them are seated awkwardly, and none of them are having an issue. But I'll try my best to show you like hot spot areas real quick. So as you can see a little bit, I can't get the camera just right, but you're looking around the edge of your cap, making sure there's no bleeding down, there's nothing wet, everything is good. You're going to check out all the hoses, make sure the clamps are solid, you're not losing anything, and you're going to check out all of these here. If you can see, mine has a braided, so you can pretty much check all that out, make sure there's nothing going on at any of those parts. And then they pretty much are going to follow it all the way down through the bike to their best of their ability before they ultimately hit the point where they're just going through and finding the actual engagement points, where a lot of bikes will have a physical cable instead of fluid, and you'll be able to see it every time you pull in the clutch. You'll see a nub like rotate on the right side of your bike for most brands. All right, so far so good. I'm not seeing anything so far that I should be paying a dealership $300 some to be doing my first service for, especially since I've got all the receipts for my oil, my filter. I've got my receipts for everything so far, and I'm even recording it. And, the oil and the filter. We've finally arrived at that time where the next step is to change your oil and oil filter. This is where a chunk of the pain and money tends to come in, more so than the rest of it. A typical first service, depending on the brand, they'll charge you about roughly an hour and a half of labor time, plus filter, crush washer, and your oil. And that's where you can get a little expensive, because normally name brand filters, I checked Kawasaki's, they can be like 20 some odd dollars. And then depending on the oil you want, especially if you're buying name brand like a Kawasaki oil, or you want to be like very bougie, you want to make sure you've got the best of the best, you want like Castrol or you want Motul oil, it can get up there pretty quick. Because here, I'll grab a bottle right now and show you. All right, so for my very first oil change, I do plan on using Castrol. I checked the back, I looked at every single little spec, every single little line, and it matches Kawasaki's request flawlessly. So I know that I have a perfect selection, I've got the receipts, but here's where it gets expensive, because for me, with it being a Kawasaki Ninja H2, it requires, essentially, I gotta buy 5 bottles of this oil. And this oil can be pretty much like $18 a bottle. Now, so very quickly you see where $100 come from. And then, of course, I'm a huge fan of High Flow. Some people have had mixed results with High Flow and K&N, but I'll tell you what, any filter brand that's willing to put a nut on the end of their oil filter is a winner to me, because I don't like fighting with oil filters when it's time to take them off. I would much rather have something that I know I can just pop a socket on the end of it and it comes right off without any sort of fight. But to each their own, they can do and change up and yada yada as they please. But for this oil filter, it's pretty much H2 specific, because it really doesn't match anything else. And it's like a $13, $14 filter. So real quick, in just supplies, I'm over $100. So when your first service is like $300, depending on how much oil your bike takes, you can pretty much already assume 100 of that was just materials. So I'm not going to do the oil change right now. I want to get through the remainder of the checklist, and then I'll do the oil change at the very end. All right, so the next thing on the to-do list, this is where you get to your brake system, and I'm going to mention the very next point as well, because they go hand in hand, and it's called brake operation, and very similar to the clutch. You're checking for the effectiveness, the play, there's no drag whatsoever, no delay, no squishiness, because if it's real squishy, obviously there's air getting into your brake lines, and that's not good. That's how you lead to brake failure. So this is really simple. I'll happily drag the camera over there again just to show you guys, but it's pretty much cut and paste everything that we just did with the clutch, essentially. All right, so I forgot to take my sock off here. Ride fast or stay at home, of course. All right, so very similar thing. We're doing the same exact thing again. We're coming up to the reservoir and we're trying to make sure, feel around, confirm that there is absolutely no fluid leak of any kind. You do not want even the smallest of cracks or issues. And then you can see right in there, you've got to confirm that all of that area is completely dry and there's no issues. All clamps are seated perfectly and naturally. And then once you're able to confirm that information, same thing here. Everything is so butter smooth. No issues there at all. And of course, they do a ride portion of this where they also confirm that the brakes aren't choppy or having any sort of problems or anything like that either. But for the actual sitting here, checking it out, inspection portion, because you can see on the right-hand side here, the brakes go right into another stainless steel system. And you got to check out that whole line, which I already did. And you follow that all the way down, and you check out your brake caliper, make sure the rotor's not like gouged or destroyed. And you make sure your brake pads got life on them, which these most certainly do. And you just start checking everything out. And you start making sure there's no drips, no oils, no problems. Especially since that DOT4 fluid is extraordinarily corrosive and it would eat you up. Again, we're looking up there, following it down. Same thing. Checking out the rotor. Making sure the rotor looks good, the caliper looks good, there's no leaking, no problems, everything's nice. The actual brake pad's got plenty of life. And that's just the front, then they come around to the back. They do the same thing. They come over here, they check it, make sure that all this looks good, no fluid, the clip's still in good shape. All this is coming together, no problems. Make sure this is all good. Most certainly is. No problems at all. And they make sure the lines in the back are all good, which they are. And then they follow those down. And same exact thing over here. They find your caliper and they inspect the rotor and make sure all that looks good. And they'll make sure you've got brake pad, which again, it's hard to get the camera in there, but I most certainly do. And then I don't want to put down the camera just yet because the very next thing on the checklist is to look for steering play. That's very easy to find out. Easy peasy. Let's go check and see if there's any steering play, shall we? Well, look at that. Nope. Dead steady. There is no problem, no issues. Everything is tight as a whistle. And of course, keep in mind that they're going to be sitting on the bike and really working it all the way left and right. And I don't want to do that on camera, but sat here, tried it, did it. Everything's good. The stoppers work exactly where they're supposed to, and there's not any sort of issue with the steering. So, let's move on to the last and final page. And this one's my personal favorite, actually. Condition of bolts, nuts, and fasteners. So, what do they mean by that? And this is where they like to make this sound real good. This is the part where they're like, man, you know how much time I put in already? Well, 30 minutes of that hour and a half we're charging you for is the oil change. So this is a whole half an hour all in of itself. Everything else could have been done in 30 minutes, but this is the big one. This is where they get you again. And it's what they want you to believe they do. And again, I don't want to knock them too hard because there are a lot of dealerships out there that will actually genuinely do this. But the problem is that there are customers out there as well that when they do this, they will whine and cry and complain and throw a hissy fit. And let me explain to you why, and I'll show you a portion of what they're talking about and what they're doing when they do this. So pretty much what they're saying is they are checking out every single little bolt, every single little thing. They want you to understand that they are putting a tool on every single thing on this bike. And they are torque specking every single one to make sure that everything is perfect and okay. Now, I don't want to throw shade where there isn't shade to be thrown, but do you know how many bolts are on a motorcycle? How many nuts are on a motorcycle? I hate to tell you this, guys, but they most certainly are not doing this. So if you think that they're actually going to spend 30 minutes putting a tool on every single bolt, they're not. They're really not. If anything, they might check a few of the critical fasteners, ones that like could really seriously hurt or maim you if they don't do it. But here's the other dilemma with it, right? Is when people buy a bike and it's brand spanking new to them, they do everything in their power to not put a single scratch anywhere on this bike. And can you imagine how many owners would be upset, whine, cry, and moan if they get their bike back and every single bolt has scratch marks and scoring and scars of them having checked every single one of them with a tool? Now, of course, I'm not saying every dealership out there is garbage, because I did admit that there are some out there that will straight up be like, hey, I am checking all the critical bolts and fasteners, but they're not going to put a tool on every single fairing bolt. They're not going to check every single nut, but they might literally visually look at every single one or physically touch it to make sure it's not finger loose. But essentially, that's the general gist of that. They want you to understand and think that they're going over the entire bike, checking all the axles, every nut, bolt, fastener, and making sure that the bike is still as pristine as the day it left the manufacturing plant. And if it's not, that you can trust them that they will open a warranty claim and make it right. And I don't know, I've had half a dozen bikes, and I truly don't feel that any of them have had that treatment. So that's why I'm sitting here doing my own first service and walking you through everything. Because I've got all the time in the world right now. I can more than happily grab any tool I have and check every single one of these bolts and finger touch test them. And that's what I'm going to do just because I'm sitting here doing it. But it's one of those things where the only person that's going to care the most about doing this and making sure it's right is you. You are going to care about your bike significantly more than anybody else out there. And that's a fact. So let's go back to our checklist. We went over all the condition of bolts, nuts, fasteners, critical fasteners, all that good stuff. And, don't you know it? That's the end of our checklist. Haha, but it's not. There is other things that dealerships will do as a part of their first service that isn't in the owner's manual. And some of them like to keep this little trade secret because that's why they gotta get paid $300. So I'm gonna reveal to you what these secrets are. So get ready, you're gonna have your mind blown. They are gonna do two things. And the first one, depending on your state, they'll either call it like a free Joe Schmo's dealership 18 or 24 point inspection. And Lord only knows what's on that list that they're going to do. But for the most part, if you're in a state like Pennsylvania or a state that has pretty much state inspections and regulations on vehicles, and that they have to have and be able to do certain things to continue to be road legal, and you get your little happy inspection sticker. This is where they're going to essentially emulate that checklist, even if you're in a state that doesn't have it. They're going to do things like make sure all your turn signals work. They're going to make sure your high beams work. They'll make sure that both your brake light hand and brake light foot work independently, and there's no electrical issue with the different switches. they'll test and see if your bike will start while in first gear without the clutch in. Because, you know what? You're right, that would be dangerous. And if your bike's in first gear, which mine is now in, and you come it down and you want it to hit start, nothing happens. As it should. So they start doing things like that. They'll start it up in first gear and then kick the kickstand down and see if the engine will hard stop to make sure that you're safe. And I don't know about you, but I'd really rather my bike not endure that kind of abuse. I would much rather make sure that I just don't have the kickstand down in first gear. Now, I'm not saying that feature doesn't work on this bike, but I don't want my engine hard emergency cutting itself off as a test to see if it'll do it. They'll make sure your plate light works, and they'll go over and make sure your little test ride where they check the brakes, the throttle, all that good stuff, they're going to make sure it passes a test ride, which more often than not, you probably rode your bike to this place. So you know darn well that all that already works. So now they did Jim Bob's shop of 24-point inspection and physical test ride, which, after they do an oil change, they really should do a physical test ride, make sure that it's not puking oil or anything stupid or silly. But that's all a part of this extra thing the dealerships do. And then there's one additional thing they'll do on top of that to really make you feel special. And I am excited to show it to you because a lot of people, believe it or not, actually neglect this. And it shocks me, it really does. But this is the last thing they'll probably do for you to make you feel like you're really getting the bang for your buck. Now, I apologize because despite this stand being crazy awesome, and I'm super thankful to my girlfriend for letting me borrow it, it doesn't give a great view of what I'm trying to show here without me physically manipulating it, but it's right here. The chain. They are going to immediately say, all right, well, it was a brand new chain, brand new sprockets, brand new bike, right? Well, they already know that just based on how chains work, things work, yada, yada, how things break in, that your chain's probably gotten looser. And they're going to clean, lube, and adjust your chain just because they're the greatest of guys. So this requires no real effort on your part. And I'm going to show you real quick just how easy it is. Your bike, very likely, somewhere on it has a sticker that tells you exactly where and how your chain should be. And it's going to give you a measurement reading. And that measurement reading is exactly how much up and down you should have in your chain to be within spec. Now, keep in mind that looser is better, tighter is worse, because as you sit on the bike and introduce sag from your weight, the chain and the whole swing arm, everything's going to tighten up because the wheel is going to come further out from the bike, thus creating a little bit of a tighter on your chain. Just like every time you hit a speed bump, thump, that chain's going to get real tight, real fast, real quick. So looser is always better, but you also got to make sure it's always within the spec that is prescribed for your bike. Now, I don't know if the sticker got clear on here, but for me, it says that my personal chain should have enough slack in it that it should be between 1 inch to 1.4 inches of wiggle. So I'm going to measure it real quick and then I'll get right back to you guys and tell you exactly where I'm at. Oh, actually, real quick, just as a heads up, if you're trying to do this yourself and you've never done this before, pretty much what you got to do is you take a measuring tape and you figure out what the middle of your chain is. And usually if you measure from the center of your front sprocket to the center of your rear sprocket, depending on your bike, it could be, I don't know, like 27, 28, maybe 26 inches. And obviously half of that is about 13 to 14 inches. So then you pretty much use that measurement to figure out where the middle of your chain is. And that's pretty much your measuring point. So for me, it's real easy to figure out because it's actually pretty much right where this bolt is, right here. So as long as I measure from pretty much right underneath that bolt, I'm pretty dead center. And it'll tell me everything I need to know. Alright, so I just finished measuring from the furthest point down that it goes. And you always want to use a real easy, you don't want to use like the bottom of a link and the top of a link. You want to use the same part. So if you use one of the rivets that are smack dab in the middle of the chain, you want to use that rivet as the top and the bottom measurement. And for me, with my chain at 600 miles, surprisingly, it's actually not out of spec. It is definitely on the looser side. I am definitely closer to that 1.3, 1.4 range. And it probably is within, I'll say maybe 400 miles of needing slightly tightened up. But again, that's something that is very easy for me to do because all I got to do is put it on a single-sided swing arm stand, which I do have. I loosen 2 bolts pretty much right. There you go. You can pretty much see it. I loosen those 2 bolts there, and then that little disc right there in the middle, I pretty much just spin that ever so slightly, and the whole rear swing arm will come out a tad bit, and then that essentially tightens the chain. So again, for me, there's no need to pay somebody $300 to loosen 2 bolts, spin a wheel just a tiniest a bit, and then retighten them. I'm perfectly capable of doing that myself. And that's it. That's pretty much the whole first service, other than the oil change, which I'm going to do here in just a minute. But so far, I haven't seen, checked, or done anything that I couldn't already do myself. I can totally understand if it's your first brand new motorcycle, you don't know anything about the maintenance of it, you don't know how to check any of this, where it can be really intimidating and you're going to want to take it to a dealership. Or if you're like, I am so scared of losing that warranty, I would rather just take it to a dealership for that first service, you're totally okay to do that. There is nothing wrong with not wanting to get your hands dirty and changing your own oil and lubing and adjusting and cleaning your own chain and all that shebang. But for me, I've got all the time in the world. I'm more than happy to save myself the money and just buy the oil and the filter myself. And that is it. Pretty much in about a 45-minute video so far, I was able to go through, check off everything, and don't get me wrong, I did some stuff off camera. Realistically, yeah. Up to this point, I probably did spend about an hour, but I also was on camera a ton talking about it instead of doing it. But generally speaking, even with all these delays and extra things that I'm doing, it's not a big deal. The oil change, yeah, that's going to take a half an hour. I'm probably going to do that. I might do it off camera actually, because I don't want to subject you guys to an already super long video. I might make that its whole own thing. I'm going to make that its whole own thing. But so far, that's it. We pretty much went over Sergeant Kyle's Super Duper Moto dealership 2412 300 point inspection. We pointed out the chain, how it's going to do all that good stuff. And we went through the checklist top to bottom of everything they would do for your first service. So now it comes down to the question. Is it worth it to you? I don't know. That's for you to decide, for you to figure out whether it's something you want to continue to take to a dealership. But for me, I'm more than capable and happy to document it and keep records of everything, have my receipts, and just do it all myself. as no one's going to care about the perfection of this motorcycle more than me. And I'm not saying that dealerships never accidentally miss things or anything like that, but you know, again, it's exactly as I said. Nobody is going to care more if the brake fluid is dripping out than me. I'm going to be the one that cares the most because I'm going to be the one who goes to hit the brakes and I'm like, my right hand brake goes all the way to the handle grip and I'm getting no braking power. That's very interesting. I'm going to be the one that cares. So I want to be the one to inspect it. I want to make sure that everything is working and operational. So to each their own, and thank you guys for sticking around for the 45 minutes as I went through every checkpoint and every to-do and list and yada yada. And don't get me wrong, there's services down the road that are like valve checks, or for me, at 30,000 miles, I'm supposed to check the axial play of the impeller for the supercharger. No, I'm not doing that myself. So by all means, I'm not knocking the service intervals. There are some things in there like the valves and whatnot that I don't want to do myself. But when it's just a check this, monitor that, look at this, sign that, blah, 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 I'm more than capable of riding my own motorcycle and saying, yep, the brakes work, and yep, there's no fluid dripping out of it. So I wish you guys the best, and if you guys have had any great, bad horror stories, phenomenal tales of first services or interactions with dealerships, please comment down below because I would really love to hear other people's interactions, whether it be good or bad, with motorcycle dealerships. And I look forward to chatting with you guys about it. All right, I'll see you. Peace.